So weigh in on the question that Al and I were talking about in the first block, which is, does Chris Christie have to up his game a lot to keep up with Jeb Bush, who I think since he started this period of not quite in but headed towards being in, I think has performed at a pretty high level?
He has performed at a pretty high level, and yes, I think Governor Christie will have to step up his game. I mean, I think Governor Christie spent much of this year probably hoping against hope that Jeb Bush wouldn't become a candidate, and every indication now is that Jeb Bush is in. It does put a lot of pressure on him. It puts pressure on him to figure out how he's really going to raise the money that he would need to run the kind of campaign that he wants to run, and I think that it puts pressure on him, as Al was saying, on the question of how he presents himself to other people.
Dan, let me pose or play devil's advocate here. Other than the money and a couple decent interviews, what is there to think that Jeb Bush is really that formidable front runner that's going to somehow clear the field?
Well, I don't think he is going to clear the field, but I think Chris Christie's in one of the tougher positions of the whole field, because they're essentially fishing out of the same pool in terms of money. We know that, and in terms of some of the supports that they're likely to go after. So other people may be less affected by Jeb Bush, and we don't know what kind of a candidate he's going to be. I mean, you've seen enough people come and go over the years that until they are actually presidential candidates and are tested, we don't know whether they're going to live up to the expectations.
Dan, what do you guys sense of how aggressive the Jeb people are going to be, or maybe already have been, with bundlers in New York and Florida, Chicago and elsewhere, to say, we want you to start lining up for Jeb, even if we don't have a formal committee, and do something that his brother's campaign did, which said, by the way, if you want to be with us, if you want to give to us, don't start giving to anybody else, even $1,000 or $2,000.
I don't know if Jeb Bush is the same as his brother in terms of those things, but I think that by doing what he did last week, it's showing that he's going to be very aggressive. I think that was a move that was designed to send signals not to the world at large so much, but to the smaller class of people who are instrumental and important and influential at this very early stage in the process.
You know, one of the things, Al, that I hear a lot from, if you're looking at chinks in Jeb's armor, and I happen to think he's a very strong candidate. I know you were playing devil's advocate a bit, but I think he's stronger than some people realize in some areas. Young Republican activists I talk to are not enthusiastic about him. I talked to one Hill aide who's very interested in presidential politics, who just basically said, no thank you, I just don't want my party to be represented by another Bush. Is that a problem for him as he thinks about challenging people like Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, who potentially have more appeal to young voters?
Yeah, I think it is, Mark. He's got a number of problems. He's got some strengths, as you know, but he's got problems with some issues, Common Core and immigration. He's rusty. He hasn't been in a ballot in many, many years. We don't know, what he's going to be like. And I'll tell you, both Chris Christie and Jeb Bush have a very important early decision. Iowa. Do they go all out in Iowa or not? It's not. The Iowa caucuses are not made for either one of those candidates.
Dan,
do you?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Al.
I agree with that. I mean, I think that the question of Iowa, Al, is important. Both of them will want to probably try to do what Mitt Romney did the last time, which is keep the option open of going full bore, but not make it look like you're doing that from the very beginning, and to see how the rest of the field begins to shake out in Iowa. So that's a tough question. The other thing we know is that New Hampshire was not particularly friendly to his brother in 2000. George W. Bush got beaten badly in New Hampshire. We don't know whether Jeb Bush has got any better opportunity in New Hampshire than his brother had if he runs against certain kinds of candidates.
But the father won it twice, even though the second time it wasn't considered a victory.
So he'll be his father's son rather than his brother's brother.
If you assume,
in many ways, perhaps.
If you assume, as I think you guys probably do, that maybe there's some scenario for Mitt Romney at this point, but he certainly sits out for a while now if Jeb Bush goes forward. What about the other establishment candidates? Governor of Michigan, Governor Snyder, you maybe think Mike Pence is an establishment candidate, John Kasich. Is there anybody else who looks at this and says, I'm ready to take Jeb Bush on? And if so, where is he vulnerable to attack from the establishment side?
Well, I think he's vulnerable to attack on the establishment side against himself. I mean, I think he's got to perform in a way that establishment people who think he's a strong candidate can say, yes, I was right about that. I think the others that you mentioned, I'm dubious that Governor Snyder will get in. I talked to him a few weeks ago. He did not sound like a person who wanted to get ready to run a presidential campaign. I think the same about Governor Kasich. I think it's more probable or more possible that he might become a candidate. But the things he's doing right now are not designed to be a candidate. They're more designed to attract attention to some of the things he cares about.
Mark, if you're right about Romney, and I think you are, I think the two most probable challengers to Jeb Bush for that establishment side, if you will, and that's oversimplified, would be Christie, as we said, and perhaps Scott Walker of Wisconsin.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys as we close here, just your fingertip feel hunch about when do people get in? When do we start seeing regular trips to Iowa and New Hampshire by anybody, even somebody like a Rick Santorum or somebody who's a longer shot? When do you think that activity starts?
Well, we've seen that on the part of a lot of people for quite some time now, the trips. But the trips are easy. They've been testing trips. They're not the kind of thing that you have to do to put a campaign together. I would think it will be a little earlier than we might have thought 2 weeks ago, because I think Jeb Bush, in the same way that Barack Obama accelerated Hillary Clinton 8 years ago, Jeb Bush puts pressure on everybody to show a little activity earlier than they might have been willing to. And if they're going to raise the money, they've got to do it they've got to get at it pretty quickly.